Happy Hanukkah! This year, Judaism Unbound is partnering for the fourth year with our friends the Torah Studio in an initiative called ApocryFest, Hanukkah Unbound and Uncanonized. We believe that Hanukkah can be a time of year where we connect to many books that were not included in the Hebrew Bible, but which nonetheless can be meaningful to Jewish individuals, communities, and the world. Through 4 conversations, we will be exploring some of these books in detail and asking big questions about what canon even means. Liana Wertman and Lexi Kohansky, both of the Torah Studio, join us for all 4 of these conversations. Learn more and sign up for our ApocryFest email list, which will be sent out throughout Hanukkah at judaismunbound.com/apocrypha. That's APOCRYPHA. Before we start, a Judaism Unbouncement that mini courses in the Onion Yeshiva, our digital center for Jewish learning and unlearning, are now open for your registration. They will begin in January, and the 4 options this time around are entitled The Torah of Kink, Hasidism and Neo-Hasidism, Brit Milah Unbound, Exploring Circumcision, and Queering Kedusha, that means holiness, through Jewish craftways. Sign up at judaismunbound.com/classes. Financial aid is available for anyone who needs it. This is a special bonus edition of Judaism Unbound, ApocryFest 2025, Episode 3, For Ezra. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Lex Rofberg.
I'm Liana Wertman.
And I'm Lexi Kohansky.
And it's another exciting day in the Judaism Unbound Torah Studio-averse as we dive into our third of 4 conversations to celebrate ApocryFest this year, our annual initiative where we mark Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights, as also a festival of Apocrypha. We are really revved up today to dive into a particular book, For Ezra. That's the number 4, Ezra. We also, you can be for or against Ezra, the person in the Bible, but it is in fact the number 4, Ezra, for our purposes. That can be very confusing because people know of a book called Ezra that doesn't have a number in the Bible. There's, in other versions of the Bible, 2 Ezra, 3 Ezra, etc., all sorts of numbered Ezras. Just go with 4 Ezra. That's the book we're going to dive into today. But before we get too far into it, Liana, can you give us a little reminder about a certain little event coming up that all of our listeners should be immediately signing up for at judaismunbound.com/apocrypha?
Well, if you're listening to this before the 21st of December, I hope that you will join us for a Judaism Unbound and Torah Studio Hanukkah party to celebrate the incredible apocryphal festival of Hanukkah, to celebrate the new moon of Tevet, and to celebrate another year of learning so much about the books in and beyond our canon. We're going to be hanging out. We're going to be getting to know other people who care about this nerdy stuff with us. There might even be games. So I hope that you'll join us and celebrate with us and bring a little extra light to Hanukkah this year.
So I'm really revved up about these games. I'm hearing rumors that there might be a team of Lex and Lexi, Team Lexi's, that will be really, really jazzy against a team of Liana and Rini Yehuda, which we might call the Uz, ending in Uz. That's not as catchy of a connection as the Lex-Lexi connection. But if you want to be in some friendly, ultimately very, very friendly competition in a Judaism Unbound Torah Studio space, we hope that you'll come. Liana, any other little words of encouragement, excitement before we dive into our conversation?
One of the reasons that Hanukkah is so beautiful is because it is lighting up one of the darkest times of the year. And all the more so can we bring light when we all come together. And I hope that whether you're listening and you have not come to Torah Studio or Judaism Unbound classes, or especially if you're a big part of our communities, we really hope that you'll join us and build a little more light into the world together.
So let's dive into this book For Ezra. Lexi, you closed our previous episode really beautifully, helping us sort of feel the voice of Genesis Apocryphon, the fact that it's fragmented, the fact that there's these ellipses. You gave us a little live reading with lots of Mad Lib type breaks. Can you take us into For Ezra? What is this book? Why should some of our listeners, all of our listeners, be interested in it?
Everything that I know about For Ezra comes from the Jewish annotated Apocrypha and the little introduction that was written by Elizabeth Freed. So anything I know about it just comes from there as a disclaimer. But basically, we can think of 4 Ezra kind of similarly to the way that like there's First Kings and Second Kings, or First Samuel and Second Samuel, meaning like we've got the book of Ezra, and then there's other books that are Ezra books.
The Ezra expansion pack.
The Ezra expansion pack, the downloadable Ezra content. It sets itself, obviously, during the time of Ezra, who was one of the leaders of the Jewish community in our first exile in Babylon, which began in 586 BCE and lasted 70 years. And Ezra is also known as Ezra the scribe because he wrote down the Torah after the Torah was lost in the exile, and he restored teaching Torah publicly as an event, and that event that Ezra did of teaching Torah publicly is the basis for our Torah readings that we still do today. He also was responsible for changing the letters that we use to write Hebrew from what's now called Paleo-Hebrew to the Aramaic letters for Hebrew, which are the ones we use. In any case, 4th Ezra sets itself during Ezra's time, meaning in Babylon, something like 30 years after the destruction of the First Temple. Scholars think that the actual text was much later and dated to somewhere between 80 and 135 CE, which would be the post-Second Temple period.
Which is a key piece, sorry to interject, because clearly folks experiencing the recent destruction of the Second Temple were using an ancient story about a parallel event, the destruction of the First Temple, to understand their own lives.
Exactly. And the content of 4th Ezra is basically Ezra's going through like an emo phase of like, why be Jewish? Why does the Torah matter? All these promises we were told we were going to have if we live according to the Torah have failed. It seems like God's abandoned us. It's very like Jeremiah Lamentations vibes. Our religion has failed us, and now what do we do because the world doesn't make sense anymore? And the book is divided basically into 7 visions where Ezra poses challenges to the angel Uriel or to God, and then the angel Uriel responds by giving Ezra some kind of vision. The visions are often to do with the end times. And then the book ends with Ezra deciding to write down the Torah, and more than the Torah, which we'll get into, and share it with the people.
Beautiful, beautiful distillation. There's a lot there, but yes, this figure Ezra, key chronicler / giver of sacred text, of what would maybe become the Torah, has a bunch of visions, 7 of them, in conversation with this fellow Uriel. As I was reading it a second time, I realized we're connecting this to Hanukkah, which is sometimes called Chag Urim, the Festival of Lights. So maybe we could argue that this book with Uriel, like light of God, is actually a perfect fit for Hanukkah because it revolves around this angel who is associated with lights. But yeah, he's kind of, I don't know, supporting actor in this story, pops up a bunch of times. The visions are kind of wild, and there's animals that arise that are kind of multiple animals in one, and then they turn into things, and it's like clearly sort of symbolic storytelling that happens. And you mentioned it's like Jeremiah in many ways, Lamentations. I totally agree. It's like looking back at a destruction and trying to figure out what to do in the wake of that. I also think it has a real Job feel. There's like the book of Job has all of these back and forth conversations between Job and a bunch of his friends who are kind of shitty friends, but that's another conversation. He's like asking questions about why the world is the way it is. And then eventually he also has those conversations with God, God's self. And I think there's a real similarity where this book is asking big questions about like, why are the Jewish people getting punished so much if God is supposed to like us? Like, what's the deal? That's one of the questions they could ask. There's a bunch of questions, but that's just a little taste. So yeah, I think there's many ways in which this book kind of feels like other books, but it's kind of a hodgepodge of many of them.
So Just totally random from this. I'm obsessed with apocalypses. I'm obsessed with the idea of the end of the world. I'm obsessed with the fact that people seem to, even when they're afraid of it, want the end of the world. So I was much more taken by this as apocalypse literature, which is a very specific ancient form of literature. The word apocalypse comes from the Greek word for revealed, similar to apocrypha, and or hidden in some capacity. And it's the idea that a prophet will receive a vision of an imminent destruction on earth. We only have one of those in the Tanakh. That's the book of Daniel. And it is a literature that actually I think we often, as modern Jews and as Jews in general, don't engage with a ton because we have curses, right? This also reminded me a lot of the curses in Deuteronomy, this idea that there is this cyclical aspect, punishment and teshuvah and return and coming back. But because of a lot of the stuff I've been reading about how and why apocalypse literature came into being, especially in early Christianity, I feel a little bit differently and less excited, I'll be honest, about this book than it sounds like y'all are, because I don't see a hope for why Jews are going to one day be redeemed. I see a hope for an end of times. I see a hope for wanting something to end, and Ezra continuously asking to be given a vision of when the suffering will end and not hearing the cycle that Uriel is offering him. I think what I'm really thinking about is the power of the imagery we use to imagine major changes in the world. And when we imagine the end of the world, what that does to us versus imagining big changes and how we can approach stories in that way. And I think especially when it comes to the Second Temple and through like what we're experiencing through destruction, what does it mean to have to wake up the next day and still deal with the world? And I'm honestly maybe needing some support from y'all because I'm kind of having my first moment in this series where I'm glad this isn't part of our canon. I don't want this theology in my community.
Liana, I would love to take you into the text. The first challenge that Ezra brings in chapter 3, which is confusingly the first chapter. The first chapter of 4 Ezra is chapter 3. If you can do that math, then...
Which I will say, the Talmud sections always start with 2A.
So that said, the first challenge Ezra brings struck me as the realist. This is verse 28 through 36 selections. Ezra says, "Then I said in my heart, are the deeds of those who inhabit Babylon any better? Is that why it has gained dominion over Zion? For when I came here, I saw ungodly deeds without number, and my soul has seen many sinners during these 30 years, etc. So are the deeds of Babylon better than those of Zion? When have the inhabitants of the earth not sinned? You may indeed find individuals who have kept your commandments, but nations you will not find." I'm hearing a couple things in what's going on for Ezra there. One is, if we are in exile for our sins, the place we got exiled to is just as bad as we were, if not worse. So how is that justice? And then the second piece is, when we're saying sin, we mean not living according to the Torah. That's what Ezra means, basically, is like not being in right relationship with God through God's revealed word, and ironically, God's revealed word in the Torah. Ironic for a series on Apocrypha. But actually, that system just doesn't work with human nature because it's not possible to do it in a sustained way. Maybe individual human beings are blessed to bring that much righteousness and divinity and compassion into the world, but on a collective scale, I, Ezra, have never seen it work, and I don't think it can. I think he's partly asking, like, how do we build collective liberation in a world where people are so messed up? Uriel's answer to that is basically like, you don't know shit. You don't even know what fire and water are. But I don't find that so satisfying. Lex or Liana, what do you think there?
I mean, this is interesting. This comes up for me with a lot of Apocrypha book conversations. Like, I often don't like the content, the particular subject matter or the particular hot takes of Apocrypha books. The best example of this, Jubilees, which I teach about and which I love dearly, doesn't like me. It says intermarriage is the worst. It goes on many, many long rants about this. And so people who know Jubilees, when they learn that I am really into it, they're like, Lex, how do you like this? It actually would prefer your life not be as it is. For me, these books are not about their opinions. And that's true with Torah too. Like I don't like books of the Bible or Torah because I think they have the correct thoughts about the world. I think they have some good thoughts about the world and they have some terrible ones. And so, Liana, when you bring up like this whole framing, this whole anchoring of hope for the end, basically, that's not appealing to me. It's not appealing to me either. And I don't even really feel like I need to get you to like this book. I'm fine with you not wanting it canonized. But I think it points to the ways in which maybe our relationship to sacred text, it might benefit us to not see it as just sort of relationship to that text's ideas and sort of the goodness or badness of its approaches. Because for me, what I love is just sort of the chutzpah of this text. For example, it looks at the story of Moses. The Torah is often called the 5 books of Moses, right? Like, I think that's actually a mistake, but people do it. And it says, hey, you know what? This whole thing of Moses being in a burning bush and having a schmooze with God, that's not just Moses. Ezra has that too. Here's the exact same scene. It has Ezra, God saying that. And then Ezra responding, here I am. The identical thing as Moses at the burning bush. And it's even coming from like a bush that Ezra is sitting near. The author goes to great lengths to tell you basically, hey, this other fella in Jewish history, just as interesting, just as important as Moses, through drawing that parallel. I think Ezra's fine. I think Moses is fine. They both have a lot of problems, a lot of great things. But what I like is that that's kind of a push towards a world where we had here I am, Hineni stories for far more people. That would be a better world where we don't see only Moses as being kind of the one marked by God as leading the Jews to whatever future. So that was one thing I loved. And then another quick shout out, in the 10th chapter, there's this gorgeous little excerpt where in the midst of a vision, Ezra sees this woman who is expressing great grief over the loss of her son. And I mean, he interrupts her. It's actually very rude and heartless. It's like terrible pastoral care. But he says a wild thing that I noticed because Arthur Waskow, a former guest on this podcast and part of our Judaism Unbound community, recently died. And there's a teaching that Ezra brings where he says, listen, just as you brought forth in sorrow, just as you, this woman, brought forth a child in sorrow, so too the earth as a whole has brought forth fruit, which is to say human beings. Like the fruit of earth itself is humanity. I found in this a direct teaching of what Arthur Waskow lived his whole life around, which was the idea that earth and earthlings are actually one and the same thing. That Adam and Adamah, Adam being earthling or human, and Adamah being earth or soil, are in fact not separable from one another. But Liana, like, I'm cool with you not wanting it canonized. I actually think the conclusion of the book suggests it itself would prefer to not be canonized because it says there's 70 books that didn't get canonized that are actually really interesting. So I'd love to hear from the two of you about that little conclusion piece.
Well, just to respond both Lex to you and to Lexi, it is really fun to say both of your names.
That's why we're on a team.
But I want to start by saying, Lexi, I loved what you brought in about this moment of his deep grief. The response that he gets from Uriel over and over again, the first time he tends to ask and says, why are humans even alive? Why would you allow suffering to this level? And yes, he says, you don't understand. But there's one line that he says right at the beginning that just gutted me, where he has given this example. You don't even understand what water is. How can you understand the earth that God is offering you? And Ezra stays in this, like, even though he's being presented with the most beautiful parts of the world, he stays in this, but I don't want to exist. Why should humans exist as there's suffering? And Uriel says, how can one who is already worn out by the corrupt world understand incorruption? Right? How can you imagine a world that is not corrupt when you have already become corrupt by it? There's an idea there that to believe the world is not worth it because of suffering is to have been corrupted by the corruption in the world. And you can't even imagine anymore that there is a world that is pure, worth living, worth being in. And it's that the fact that that never gets solidified for Ezra is what I don't like about this book. And I think one of the reasons that I say, in a way that I haven't with other books, I don't want this to be a part of the canon, is because it feels so close. It feels like it could have been. It feels like it's right up alongside so much of what we think and know, and especially in a world where apocalyptic language is very, very present in front of us. It's almost upsetting to see it come from a Jewish place, to see it come from a deeply Jewish place. And I know it is. I know that this was a form of Jewish expression for hundreds and hundreds of years, imagining an end of the world, being afraid of this end of the world. But I think maybe I'm feeling grateful now that this isn't something that we have as easily an ability to jump into, to say, see, we are giving up on the world. See, this is just all suffering and not worth it. Instead, we get Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, who reminds us that this is all cyclical. We get the world is suffering, and yet you have to live. A balance of that kind of thinking with apocalyptic thinking. I'm glad that Apocrypha actually gives me a bit of a distance from it, to see it more as history and less as something that I have to engage with, but yet, obviously, I do.
I just love how self-aware this book is in this moment. I mean, the last verses literally say, God told me, Ezra, make public the 24 books, i.e. the Tanakh, that you wrote first, and let everybody read them, but keep the 70 that were written last, i.e. the Apocrypha, keep them private in order to give them to the wise among your people, for in them is the spring of understanding, the fountain of wisdom, and the river of knowledge, which is like, real ones know Apocrypha. It's like so into itself as a genre, even as it is creating this genre that's like, we know what is the best part of this tradition, and it's the part we made, which is quite the energy.
Yeah, well, I think that part's so interesting. I think the way you read it is the way a lot of folks, including many scholars, read it. I'm torn. And partially because of my relationship with a passed on yeshiva's teacher, Ava Mrochek. I'll probably send her a note and get her take on this. She has emphasized in her writing that the canon as we know it, like the set of books that is now part of Hebrew Bible, really was not fully clear until much later than we realize. It does appear to be largely determined as the Talmud is being compiled, because it itself sort of cites certain books and not others. But the Talmud itself actually shouts out the book of Ben Sirach, which did not make the canon, and it asks questions, like we talked about with the hand impurity thing. Like, it asks questions about whether Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, or Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, are in fact sort of the status that we might call now canon.
We mentioned that in episode 1 about impure versus pure texts, and the impure ones are the canonical ones.
Right, exactly. And so one read on this is that this text sort of knows it's outside the canon and is saying, well, outside the canon is super cool, and this 70 set of books is like really, really awesome, and implicitly the thing you're reading right now is part of that. The other is that, like, basically we have certain texts sort of held by the 24 in this story. By the way, 24 is the number of letters in the Greek alphabet. And there are other places where various writers talk about 22 books of the Bible, and 22 is the number of Hebrew letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And so scholars like Eva Mrochek and others have argued it's not really a number of books. It's more like there's an A to Z of books that are really written and important. And then there's all these other books that it's kind of on us to create and seek. Given the work we're doing with ApocryFest, I feel really excited that sort of the 75% of most important Jewish wisdom that we have is the stuff that hasn't been marked as being of the utmost importance. It's what we have yet to create. It's what we're seeking. And even once we write those books, they kind of become part of the old, like we always have to be creating the new ideas, if that makes sense. I could be stretching the text, but I think that that's another way to read this. There's an A to Z of written text, and it's on us to create 70. And the number 70 also, it doesn't always mean 70. Like in the book of Esther, it says there's 70 languages in there. It's kind of like the Bible's code word for like a super high number of things. There's a lot, like it's on us to make a lot of new texts. And that's what the 70 seems to be getting at.
That's making me think about the way canon fits into our life. And I've been thinking a lot about an idea of Jewish literacy. We talk about people being Jewishly literate, knowing how to engage actively with all aspects of Jewish life. It's a very fraught term. I don't love it. But when you say A to Z as the canon, I'm like, oh, those are the letters. When we learn the canon, we're learning the letters. We are learning how to sound them out. We're learning what noises they sound like together. And when we make words, when we make our own words from those letters, that is the 70 extra pieces, right? You have to actually know the letters. And that's one of the reasons why you will always find me supporting the canon in the end, simply because those are the letters of Jewish language, essentially. But that does not mean that we are not putting them together to make brand new things. And, you know, whether we like them or not, whether I like for Ezra or not, it puts me in a position to really encounter what other people are putting together with those letters of canon, right? This book quotes so much Torah. I mean, it doesn't just give itself that it wrote canon. It enamors itself in canon. It roots itself deeply. It quotes Moses saying, choose life, really letting us know that it does know Torah. And all the more so, it makes it sometimes troubling if we don't agree with the words. But I have my own words to talk about it through the canon as well. And that's taken time, but it means that I can be in conversation with Ezra, the actual canonized one, and for Ezra, and I guess supposedly 3 and 2 and all the other ones that I don't know.
To pick up on this idea that we are the ones who say the words that play out the letters of the canon, I got something I don't like about For Ezra, which actually I also don't like about Genesis Apocryphon from last episode, which is that there's these visions that happen, but then the next thing that happens after the vision is that an all-knowing angel explains it. And I'm like, that's boring and shuts down conversation and doesn't leave any room for the human beings in the picture to really have a voice. And maybe that's also something Ezra in this book is struggling with. It's like, you told me what to do and I did it, and now my life is screwed up and I don't know who I am anymore because my whole thing was I'm erasing my idea, my conception of myself in total submission. That's maybe an overreading, but my point is that in the Torah, as it's canonized, I'm not going to claim this very confidently, but I don't think that there are any visions that God or an angel interprets directly. The most famous example of a vision that gets interpreted in Torah is when Pharaoh has the dreams about the cows and the wheat. And the interpretation of that dream does get given, but it gets given by a human being, Joseph, who is like singled out as an interpreter of dreams. As opposed to these texts where like Ezra gets like 7 visions, and then after every one, Uriel is just like, and here's what that meant. Can we like look specifically at the woman to city vision? Because I feel like that one is so generative.
Sure. So there's this woman who emerges in the 4th vision. I have on this podcast often argued that the 4th in a list of 7 sometimes is meant to be underscored because it is the middle. If you think about a menorah, a 7-branched menorah, the 4th branch, if you count from left to right, is the vertical one in the middle. The Shabbat, 7 blessings we say of the Amidah, the 4th out of 7 is itself the blessing for Shabbat that talks about, it's like when you mention the title of the movie in the movie, like that's the 4th blessing of the 7 Shabbat Amidah. Like, so this 4th one, this woman appears and she is mourning the death of a son. Lexi, I'll let you take it from there and get us a little deeper into the weeds.
So she's mourning the death of this son, and Ezra he thinks he's consoling her. He's talking to her about, you shouldn't be sad about your son. You should be sad about the destruction of Zion, Jerusalem, because the whole thing was destroyed and that was a way bigger deal. And then the text says, while I, Ezra, was talking to her, Her face suddenly began to shine exceedingly. Her countenance flashed like lightning, so that I was too terrified to approach her, and my heart was terrified. While I, Ezra, was wondering what this meant, she suddenly uttered a loud and fearful cry, so that the earth shook at the sound. When I looked up, the woman was no longer visible to me, but a city was being built, and a place of huge foundations showed itself. Meaning, Ezra thinks he's talking to a woman mourning her son and says, you should be mourning the city of Jerusalem. And then the woman gets furious at him and reveals that she actually is the city of Jerusalem mourning all her children.
And then Uriel tells him, this is exactly what that means. And he tells him that that's Jerusalem. And first of all, I think we got it. When you read it, you're like, okay, I get it. You're Jerusalem. But Uriel does push him and says it very clearly. And this is what you're supposed to do. That kind of follow-up, Lexi, I hear you, right? There's this like feeling of the divine coming down and telling us how to understand these texts and these visions. And it just reminds me of the moment in Talmud where they're having a fight about the halacha and they're having a fight about law. And a rabbi calls out to the sky and says, if I'm right, God will answer. And God says, yes, Rabbi Eliezer is right. And the other rabbis look at him and say, Lo b'shamayim hi. Torah is no longer in heaven, that God gets to tell us exactly what it means. And I think that that is something that I sit with. And it's a similar time period to this book, to Fourth Ezra's. Maybe I wonder about when we talk about canon and what has become Jewish over time. I think I feel grateful that we have leaned a lot more into the opportunities that let us say, no, Torah is ours on earth and we have to change it, and not one that continues to ask us to just have everything explained to us by God.
There's a theme arising over the course of these episodes, which is the three of us really like Mad Libs. We like the opportunity to fill in the blanks. We don't want sentences that are fully written out and explained and articulated. We want space for our own Torah, and not just our own Torah, but everybody else's Torah as well, to flow on in. And so I'm with you. I think that the way that there's this back and forth, it feels kind of patronizing in the text when we get, here's the vision, and yes, here's exactly what it means. I do kind of have that experience with the Joseph. Like when you started talking, Lexi, I was thinking of the Joseph story also. And I have the same experience with that, honestly, even though it's a human explaining the story versus God. Like it still bothers me the same amount. But I hear what you're saying, which is like being given the piece of art without, and here's what the yellow symbolizes, and here's what the red symbolizes, and here's what these shapes, like, I don't want that in the art museum. I mean, maybe if I'm struggling, I want like a little starting point to get me rolling, but I'm with you. I think that the Mad Libs is the powerful way to go, and that's part of the fun of Apocrypha as a genre. Like, again, I'm not always that excited about the books themselves, but what is a gift with For Ezra, when I compare it to, say, Ezra, like the one that's in the Bible, is with Ezra, there are thousands of years of rabbinical takes on what we can and should do with that. And look, I enjoy that. Like I spend time exploring some of those. But with For Ezra, if I'm confused by a section, it is much harder for me to like, I'll go to Safaria and just see what the different people, like I have to generate my own take. And that actually feels like sort of automatically a set of actions that are going to lead to creativity in the world, which is part of why I like it. The last thing I'm going to say is that, Liana, you have made yourself an honorary Lex. I know we were talking about teams at the beginning of this. What does the syllable Lex in Greek mean or relate to? Words, lexicon. You brought that gift of a teaching that we have letters of Torah, like maybe the texts are the written letters of Torah, but it's on us to create the words. You were taking us to the level of, I'm going to use a really annoying word, lexeme. The term lexeme is like a set of letters that collectively convey some kind of verbal meaning as either a word or a part of a word. And so you may not be a Lex in name, but you are now part of Team Lex. So when we have that event on December 21st, you will be able to flow in and amongst the Lex team to the fullest of your ability. And hopefully we'll earn our way onto yours too.
Lexeme is definitely like a Hebrew plural of Lex and Lexi.
Wow. Wow.
You said that, and I was like, I was like, no, Lex, it's the plural of your name.
Wow.
I'm part of the Lexeme team.
These and these. Both of these are words of the living God. Amazing. So this is delightful. By the way, for those who really like unexplained visions, I encourage you to look at the Book of Enoch, another part of Apocrypha, which gives you a whole lot of strange visions and much less explanation of what's happening. So that is just a little unsolicited plug at the end. We're so grateful to all of you for listening to these different conversations. We hope that you will head to judaismunbound.com/apocrypha, APOCRYPHA, to sign up for our Zoom gathering that's coming up. We hope that you will, in general, send us your emails, your visions, see what I did there, your thoughts, your questions on what we might do with Apocrypha now and in the future. So you can email me at lex@judaismunbound.com, Lexi, L-E-X-I, at thetorahstudio.org, and Liana, Liana, at thetorahstudio.org. So thanks so much for listening. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.